Okay guys, so what we have going on today is going to be pretty advanced, but I think you're ready for it. So I hope you played around with this a little bit. You can walk around, you can pick up a weapon, and we have our line trace showing us where these projectiles are going. But if you've played around with it for any length of time, you've noticed there's some little bugs and some things that maybe other games ignore, and I don't want to. One issue is, while it does go to the center of the crosshair most of the time, there are still certain conditions, and this is with this is supposed to be this way, believe it or not. It's supposed to go toward the center of the screen, but under certain conditions, you can tell the projectile never actually makes it to the center of the screen. Now, different games handle this different ways. Some games, you know, choose to ignore it. Like I've seen some indie games, they ignore it. I've seen some pretty advanced games and they ignore it. Other games will move the crosshair. Some will turn the crosshair off and project something else. That's kind of a AAA style way to fix the problem. And that's kind of what we're going to go for. Whether you're in first person or third person, we want to make it so when he shoots and you will not hit the middle of that crosshair, I want it to somehow let the player know he's not going to have a good shot. So that way, somebody sitting around, so when he's waiting, lining up his shot on somebody coming around the corner, he's like, oh man, I thought it was going to hit and it didn't hit. The player needs to know that it's not going to happen. And so my idea of letting the player know will be to gray out the crosshair so he still has a reference to the center of the screen, but it'll be obvious, okay, this is definitely no longer accurate. In addition to that, I'm going to have a laser beam come from the muzzle of the gun and actually point to where on the wall that this is gonna where the projectile is actually gonna go. So that's pretty advanced. I haven't seen too many tutorials. So some people will ask, well, why don't you just shoot out of the center of the screen where this line trace is going, and then it's going to always shoot the center of the crosshair? And the problem with that is that you'll be able to cheat. And here's the reason. So like, look right here. Here's a client. I'm going to position him about right here, and notice you can't really see the other player at all. And then I'm going to go to the other screen. Okay, right here. He's on the other side of the screen. This is a different screen. So if I get him positioned right, there you go. Notice if I was shooting out of the center of the screen, I would be able to hit with my line trace and my projectile, which is kind of weird. It's actually hitting the wall. With my line trace, I would be able to hit the other guy. But the other guy, from his viewpoint, here he is, he can't even see the guy shooting at him. That totally give an unfair advantage. So we don't want to shoot out of the center of the screen. That's not an option in a multiplayer game. So what I'm going to show you guys how to do is just what we talked about. And it's fairly complex. And when I sat down this week and when I figured it out, I almost wanted to keep it to myself. That's how much I really liked it. But obviously I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna show you guys how it's done. So we're gonna start off here. We're gonna go off of our tick event. So, and like I said, you gotta be really careful about what you're firing off your tick event. So we're gonna have lots of ways to protect ourselves from screwing up our frame rate and everything like that. So first, what we're gonna do is we're gonna say is locally controlled, and I went over what this means. I've recently found out that if you are using replicated characters, which you are in multiplayer games, that everybody per character seemingly is running this event tick. So I'm trying to make sure that I do this as much as possible when applicable. So in this situation, for right now, we're going to do it. So that way all the clients and the server and everybody aren't running the code every time, every tick, which remembers every frame rate. The next thing, since this is going to be only happening if we have a weapon, we're going to go get our spawned weapon reference. get spawned weapon, and we're going to check if it is valid. Because we don't want to do anything unless we have a weapon in our hands. Now, the next part probably would be best if we just went ahead and made a function right away. So I'm going to go ahead and create that. And we're going to call it calculate shoot actual. Okay, and so this thing is going to be a lot like how we calculated our shoot. If you remember, let me get it back out of here. In our actual firing mechanism, wherever I put that, that's the interact, jump. Where is it? Is it over here? Well, wherever the heck I put it, here it is. Calculate shoot 2. You can see what I do is I start a line trace, and then I go from there, and I break my hit off the line trace, and that's how we determine our projectile. So what we're going to do is we're going to do 2 line traces. Now I looked online, and everybody was like, "Oh, it's simple. All you do is, you know, do 2 line traces, and you can figure out how to do the technique I'm talking about." But I didn't see anybody online actually showing how to make this calculation I'm talking about. So that's why I'm just going to go ahead and do it here, and it's easier for me just to show you than to keep yammering on about it. And I keep there it is. I'm looking all over for this thing. I'm going to put it where I can actually find it. That's our fire function. That's what I've been yammering on about until I found it. Calculate shoot 2. I just wanted to actually click it in case anybody was looking for it. So we're going to basically do double this work every tick, but we're going to do it in an efficient way that doesn't cause a bunch of problems. So let's get our calculate shoot actual, and let's just drag it out here. There's nothing in it. And we're going to double click, and then we're going to start getting to work. So let's go ahead and grab our follow camera. And this is going to start out a lot like the other one, but it's going to deviate very quickly. So we're going to get world location. Then we're going to get our forward vector. And this is all review, so I'm not going to spend forever talking about it. Going to multiply vector times a float. And we're going to multiply that by, let's see, 10,000. Okay. Add, plus. And we're going to do a vector plus a vector. Okay. And the other vector is going to be our world location. Okay. Do I have this right? Sometimes just for clarity, I like to make these. Okay, so it's getting the follow camera's location, and we're getting the forward vector of the follow camera, and we're multiplying that out by 10,000. Okay, that's going to be our end location of our line trace. Let's see, line trace by channel. Okay, that's our end. So you can see that in the shoot too. And then our start, of course, is going to be the follow camera's position. Nothing a whole lot amazing there. We're going to use our projectile trace that we made. And then, of course, we're going to ignore ourself, because we don't want to hit ourselves, but we have to make that an array because that's what this function accepts. Okay? You know, it's funny. I just noticed there's an ignore self check mark right here. All right, it doesn't really matter. We're just doing a little extra work. It's fine. So now what we need to do is we need to get a reference to our spawned weapon, which we already have. Okay, and we're going to cast into our spawned weapon. So cast to weapon actual master. Okay. From there, because we want to do something with the weapon, okay? That's basically why I'm casting in there. Regardless if we hit or not, we want to do something with the weapon. So what we want to do is we want to get our socket location. Get socket location. Weapon, I think I want to get it from, let me see. Get socket location. Weapon actual skeletal mesh. No. I just want to get socket location. No, I want to get socket location from the weapon actual. So weapon actual. Hold on. Get socket location weapon actual skeletal mesh. Okay. That's what we had. Okay, and what do I want to get out of there? I want to get the muzzle. So, what is all this doing? It's basically all of that just to get the weapon I have in my hands, get the reference to the muzzle that we made. That's all it is. No big deal. There's another thing we're going to get, and we want to get its rotation. Now, this is new. We haven't done this yet. Get socket rotation. Where are you? Okay, don't forget to come down into here and type muzzle. Okay, now this is going to be used a lot later on in our tutorial. The reason, though, I'm using the socket rotation is because I'm going to want to get to the weapon's forward vector. You can't get the forward vector, as far as I know, off of another vector, because that's the only data there is the fact that it's a vector, which is just an X, Y, Z location, and you can see that by breaking it out like that. That's all it is. So to get our forward vector of the muzzle, which we're going to use under certain conditions, such as a laser, then we're going to need to have it the rotation of our muzzle. So far that's all we've done. So why don't we go ahead and make a variable for this, and we'll call it, let's right click, promote to a variable, and say check muzzle rotation. And you're asking me, okay, why are you calling it check muzzle rotation? You're actually setting the muzzle rotation. Well, the reason I'm calling it that is because basically we're using these tick events to constantly be checking where our muzzle's rotation's at. And if you think about it, think about your muzzle's constantly moving it around. And if you have a laser simulated attached to it, you're going to constantly need to know where the rotation of your muzzle's at. So if you turn, it turns with you. So that's why you need that information. We're also going to want to constantly be, I'm going to promote this to a variable, check muzzle location. We're going to use this for many different things, but we're always going to need to be checking the muzzle's location. Okay, so now at this point, these are the things we're definitely going to be doing every frame, regardless if we hit or not. Everything else from this point on is going to be done on the basis that we either hit or didn't hit. So from at this point, we should drag off our return value here, which is the bool. Let's make a branch. And based off this branch, it's going to say, did we hit something or did we not hit something? And to make this a little more clear, I'm going to double click here on a reroute node. I'll just bring this guy right up here. So that way it's clear what we're doing. Then off the hit, I want to go ahead and break hit result. And that will bring all this information over here from where I can get. So this information is just our standard line trace. Nothing great here. Compile, save. So from here, we need to do a bunch of different things. So since this impact point, make sure you're at impact point, not location, not whatever. You want impact point. You want to go ahead and right click, promote this to a variable, and we're going to call it check first impact. You could say first line trace, whatever you want, but I'm going to say check first impact because they call it impact point. And this is the first time your first line trace hits. Okay? And so at this point, we got a lot of stuff that's going to come out here, and then we got a lot of stuff that's going to continue on. So I think what I'm going to do is we're going to do all of the code associated with making a hit first. And then we'll go back and do all the code associated with not making a hit, because it's going to change how we do things. So scroll over here a little bit. At this point, we are going to do another line trace by channel. Okay. Our start location is going to be our check muzzle location. Okay, because we already had that, and we always knew that. But when we did our first line trace, there's one thing we didn't know. We didn't know our first impact. Okay? And I'm actually going to want to call this check first impact point. Since this is impact point, I want to keep it consistent so I don't confuse myself with having slightly different variable names. I could drag off of here, but since I already made a variable to keep things nice and clean, we're just going to do it like this. Remember, you can drag off and connect, or you can connect like this. Since we're not talking about replicated variables right now, we don't need to worry about it. You may ask, well, why aren't you using replicated variables? Isn't this a multiplayer game? If this is a situation that you want it run on the client, the reason you want it run on the client is because these are a ton of calculations that are going to be constantly happening every frame. If you went and you ran this on the server, first off, you would have a little bit of a delay. Second of all, you would completely bog down the server, and this stuff can be intensive, so we don't want to do that. Take our trace channel to the projectile trace. We know we can already ignore ourselves, but I'm going to put it in there anyway. And the reason I'm going to put it in there is so that it reminds me to add all the other things that we're going to need to ignore when we go to debug. And this will be a good spot to do that, and we can always take ourselves off of there. Right now we don't have a draw debug type, but we will eventually. Let's go ahead and do one, and we're going to do it for one frame. Let's go back to the other one over here, and let's go ahead and debug this for one frame. Let's see, the first one's red and green. Let's make this one purple and I don't know, yellow or blue. Definitely colors that we haven't used. Okay, so for one frame, it's going to draw that. Pile, save all. So right now we're drawing 2 line traces. And the second line trace is actually going to be able to predict where our projectile is going. This is the money shot right here, folks. This is what I couldn't figure out for years. Like, not that I was sitting around thinking, but in the back of my head, I was always like, how would I calculate where the projectile was going to go before I ever fired it? And this is that magic spot. This is the thing that just dawned on me when I was making the tutorials for the earlier tutorials. So this is kind of brand new code for me as well. So that's why I'm moving a little slow. Anyway, the rest of our calculations off this will be based off of a hit. So let's go ahead and branch out. So we're going to do stuff if we have a hit, or we're not going to do stuff if we have a hit. Let's take our hit result, let's break it so we get our different results. And these are going to be the what we actually hit. So let's go ahead and proceed. So from here, we have this one called check first impact point. This impact point, however, is going to be what we actually hit. So let's promote this to a variable and call it check impact actual. And that's a very, very important variable. It allows us to predict the future. And I want you to think about it. I want you to think about why. So like if you can predict what you're going to hit as you're moving throughout the world, you can make your crosshair say turn red when you're hovering over a subject, so you know that, okay, you got a hit shot. You don't have to do it, but you can do it. You could make it so that you know if you're not on target and turn off the crosshair. You could even move the crosshair to the correct position. You could do all sorts of stuff based off knowledge of this very, very important variable. Okay? So based off this variable, we're going to already start using it, and we're going to use it to find a look at rotation. So let's do find look at rotation, and I want this to be in the target here, okay? Because it's going to be trying to, what we're going to use this for later on is our laser, and we're going to want to find out where our projectile would end up if we were to fire it. We want to know, because that's going to be where our laser points. You see already how useful this thing is? Now you know, okay, dude, I'm moving around. This is where my laser is going to need to point. So we need a start point, obviously, which, what do you think it's going to be? It's going to be, I think, check muzzle location. So does that make sense? Like, you got to know where your muzzle's at, and you got to know where you're going to shoot if you're going to simulate having a laser, right? Okay, and I should now have check muzzle rotation. I don't want to mess with that. What I want to do is go ahead. I'm just double checking my notes. I don't want to screw this up because, man, it does get messy real quick. What we want to do is set our laser rotation based off of this. So I'm going to go ahead and promote this to a variable and call it laser rotation. Okay, you don't think about this, man. You don't have to have the laser on. Okay, this is just, you could use this variable down the road for other things. But if you decide to implement a laser, this would be the variable you would pull this from. Okay, so after we do all these calculations, it's going to be very important to determine something based off of all these hits, and that something is, are you shooting the same target? So is your crosshair shooting the same target as your impact actual? Because that's going to determine whether our crosshair is lit up or not. If our crosshair, the line trace, the initial one, which is shooting into the center of the screen, isn't hitting the same thing that our projectile is predicted to hit with our impact actual, then we know our crosshair would not be lit. However, if the crosshair and the impact actual are both receiving hit responses from these two things, if they are the same, then we know that the impact actual did in fact make it to the crosshair location. I know it sounds a little weird, and I'm going to show you with line traces so you know what the hell I'm talking about. Okay, so what you want to do to figure that out, you could go off of a lot of things, and I tried it with many different ways. I tried doing the impact point, but that's too specific. And what I mean by that is I was trying to like move the crosshair around and make the crosshair light up and gray out depending on if I was hitting the same thing. But the problem is, because vectors are very specific points, every time you moved a little bit, the impact actual and line trace would be off just slightly, which would cause the crosshair to flicker on and off, which is not what we want. However, if you choose it to hit the same thing based off of its class or what it is, so say a barrel or say a person, then that makes a lot more sense. So like say, and more specifically than just an actor, which is a thing. It's just a thing. That's all actor is, a thing. I'm saying with a component, a part of a thing. That's more specific. It's not as specific as point, but it's less specific then it's less specific than actor, more specific than point. So I'm going to use hit component, and that's what I'm going to compare off of. So if hit component is equal to, so double equal sign, if it's equal to, and it doesn't matter, but I'm going to drag this down here because this is how I did it in my notes, and I don't want to get all my lines confused. So I hit my component here, and I'm going to grab my hit component from here. Okay, if these are not equal, then I know I'm not pointed at the same thing. Now, there are certain circumstances where this could have a small problem. If, let's say, it's a very, very large object, you could have situations where you're both pointed at the same component, but the crosshair and impact actual aren't lined up. That's possible, but for the most part, this is going to work just fine. So if these two things are not boolean, then we're going to make a condition. But we're not going to plug it into branch, actually. We're going to make this a variable. And we're going to call it different targets. So right-click, promote to a variable, and just say different targets. Targets. Okay. And there. So if these are not equal, different targets will be true. This is just a way to inverse your bool settings. So when you want to have opposites to make the bool make a little more sense. And that's all it is, just a yes, no. Okay, so now we answered all of the possibilities for if we have a hit. Now I need to go back and set up all the conditions for if we do not have a hit. So I go back, and our first condition is right here, if we don't have a hit. If we don't have a hit, we want to go ahead and drag down here and call check first impact point. Set check first impact point. Because this impact point doesn't exist, we need to make a fake one. Because we didn't hit anything, right? So where's our fake impact point gonna be? It's gonna be the total distance we're allowed to shoot, which is the forward vector times 10,000 plus our world location of our camera. Okay, so basically how far you can freaking shoot. That's all it is. So it's saying you didn't hit anything. We're just going to place a point way out here where you can't even see anyway. That's what I'm saying. And it's going to be in the center of the camera. That's what this point is going to represent. So in that instance, or in that situation, it's going to flow from here. And we're also going to have to remember that if we didn't hit anything, we're also going to need to set our laser rotation. Okay, and how do we calculate that? Well, we first need to find out where our check muzzle location is. So we get our muzzle location. We knew this from the beginning. But we want to find a look at rotation based off of this value we just pulled off of, which is where you are shooting to if you don't hit anything. So you just drag down here and say find look at rotation. All right? And you don't want to start from there. That's where you're going to end. So Control, left click, drag down, drop. Okay. So you find your look at rotation. So basically you're saying from the muzzle, looking at this fake distance or this fake target that's way out in the middle of nowhere, which is just a straight line from the center of the crosshair, we get a look at rotation. That's what's going to be the laser's rotation. Basically what I'm saying is straight down the crosshair is where your laser is pointed. All of that to say that, but that's why things can get a little bit complicated in here. So in this event that we don't hit anything with this first line trace, that doesn't mean we won't hit anything with the second line trace. So we need to come back up here. Boom. Because with the second line trace now, we're shooting to the muzzle, basically to the center of the crosshair. So we come back in here, and we have these values because we've set them up right here. So it's simulating hitting over here. Okay? So when we come back in, we have a second situation where we could not have a hit. So let's say our second line trace doesn't hit. What are we going to do? Well, we can assume that we at this point have different targets. Because if our crosshair is not hitting anything and this isn't hitting anything, we're gonna put down that we have different targets. So drag down here and type set different targets. I'm going to set different targets to false. I'm sorry, I misspoke. We're going to make it so if nobody's hitting anything, that means like we're shooting off into space. So that would mean we are in fact aiming at the same thing. So there's no reason to say make a laser point somewhere, because we're only going to have this laser on when we're not hitting anything. When we're not hitting the same things, if that makes sense. So basically different targets will be false in this situation. I know it can get really confusing at this point, but just trust me here. That's where it's going to go. So after this, we're going to go ahead and call our return node, which I like to have just because. So let's see if I can do new parameter for our output. Bring it over here and get rid of the bool. We don't even need that. This just helps us to actually see what's going on. So this was it for our hits. This will be for both misses, which actually means they're shooting at the same thing, which is empty space, nothing, like shooting into the sky. That's what this situation represents. Okay, so I think we may be done with our preliminary situation here. File, save all. I think we got it. I'm going to go through my notes real quick, double check that I didn't miss anything, but it's looking good. So go back to your event graph, and what we're going to do is we're going to turn off, see this thing I was searching for early on, the fire, the original calculate shoot to that we had a line trace to. We don't want that on. Okay, so we're going to turn off the debug. Don't turn off the actual trace. So for draw debug, you're going to say none. Compile, save all. Let's start off with a dedicated session, because if it works there, it's probably going to work everywhere, and let's press play. So I've got a client. He doesn't have a weapon yet. Nothing is happening. Okay, so now it's going to be hard to see. Let me go into full screen mode here. Okay, so now what you have, if you look in the center of the screen, you're seeing kind of like, oh, what's this little red thing? That is our camera's line trace, and the only way you're able to see it is if I move up and down, and you're just catching it really quick, and it's like front on the camera. It's like when you're watching, I don't know, the Olympics or something, and you're straight on the looking at the hurdles jump. You can't really see all that. You just see like one. Well, that's the situation. It's straight in front of the camera, so you're not seeing the line trace from the side. So it's there. You can barely see it if I shift up and down. However, that's the red line trace. The purple line trace represents where our projectile would go if I were to fire. Notice already, here's the situation I'm talking about. I want you, this is it. This is the awesomeness of this code right here. So the purple line is showing me, hey, you're hitting this cube, dude. And my red one is saying, no, you're hitting the ground. But the purple one is right. It's the hit actual. It's showing you where you're actually going to hit if you pull the trigger. When this condition is like this, this is when I'm going to make that crosshair dim. It's gonna go gray. Now, if you really want to get fancy, like you could move the crosshair to the location on the center of the screen. I tried doing stuff like that. It kind of jumped around. It was kind of annoying. So I just went for the what was I playing? I think I was playing Far Cry. Yeah. And the guy was in this situation and it dimmed. Like, I guess I just had it in the back of my head. That's what happened. And actually they had another crosshair, a different style would go right where the purple one is. And that's what that's how they saw that situation. All games do it in different ways. All sorts of stuff. But this is a situation where this will happen. You can look like right here. Here's another perfect example. The crosshair from the center of the screen is gonna hit the wall, but the shoot actual is saying, no, dude, you're gonna cap this guy right in the head. And I pull the trigger, and there it is. And you're gonna say to me, why do you still have those stupid sparkly things coming off your projectile? It's because to help us debug. And you're gonna use it a lot in this in the upcoming tutorials to see. Now, actually, I'm gonna stop real quick to see how many errors we have. Oh, look at that, none. Can't believe it. So this right here, if this is probably my most important tutorial, it might be the most important one ever that I do, just because I don't see this. I see people talking about it in forums. I don't see anybody actually showing other people this stuff. Maybe it's there, but when I was looking for it, I couldn't find it. But it's so critical. And think about it. You could use this if you were over the left shoulder, the right shoulder, and first person, which is what we're going to do as well. So when you're in first person, there's going to be certain times, like let's say you were right over a railing or something, you're first person, and like this, where the muzzle's right against the railing, but your crosshair is saying, no, you're gonna hit the guy that's down below the railing. Like say you're up on a deck or a balcony and you're gonna snipe somebody. This thing will tell you right now, no, bud, you're not gonna do it. Now, some first-person games, they cheat and they shoot from the straight center of the camera, so it always hits in the center no matter what. And that will happen. But you know, that's one of those situations. So this is very, very useful. And I'm just trying to show you all the different situations where they'll be a little different, and so you'll never make it. You'll never make it to that center point when these 2 points are hitting different things. Okay, so this would be having different targets. So what I can actually do is test, and this is the calculate shoot 2. We want to go to our calculate actual, and first off I want to turn off these debug lines so we know what's going on. So let's see, I'm getting stuff. This is probably our calculate shoot 2. So this calculate shoot actual, let's go to calculate shoot 2. Okay, these print strings, these gotta go, because I don't really care what the initial shoot 2 has to say. So delete that, reconnect it, compile, save all. Let's see if we got rid of that. Any more debug? I know there's more. Okay, that's probably coming from the projectile. Let's we can shoot, what do we do here? Third person example, third person blueprints. Go to our projectile master. Okay, this is that print screen we keep seeing. I'm gonna need it later, so I'm just gonna control drag off, and then pop this in here like that. Okay, and that should get rid of all of our print screens that I can think of off the top of my head. Yep. Now we can get the value Okay, let's close the projectile master. Third person character, go to calculate, shoot, actual. And then go to the event, just go to the event graph. And okay, here's calculate, shoot, actual off the tick. Let's get the different targets pool. Let's go to print screen. I can't spell. Print string. And we're going to print different targets. Say different targets. And then we're going to set the bool to print a screen if that happens. So we do this a little differently. You see how I did that? And then run that in there. And then compile, save. And if we have different targets, I think that'll work. Okay, see? It's different targets and then not different targets. Different targets, not different targets. Perfect. Everything so far is working smooth. Okay, so let me look on my list of to-do. So the next tutorial is going to have it where we're actually setting the colors up so that it's actually changing and doing things. But for this tutorial, that's it. See you on the next one.